LeighTDickey.com. What's going on, everybody? Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. You guys are getting a bonus show this week. So on today's show, I want to give you guys a behind-the-scenes look at one of my most favorite interviews that I have ever done here on the Beats and Speaks podcast, and that is my interview with Canas, aka DJ D-Rek from Georgia, that I put up on September 27th. So that was episode 37 of the podcast. That interview came together rather quickly, as all of my interviews have in the few weeks that I've been having guests on this show, or close to a month now. And when it came to doing that interview, because Canas, DJ D-Rek himself, he has AIDS. He was born with a heart defect. He's got a whole host load of medical issues. And he reached out to me on Twitter. And his initial pitch to me was, I've got an interesting story that I think you're going to love and you're going to want to hear. So I said, sure. Send me an email with some details about you and we can go from there. So he did. Because the thing with these interviews on the Beats and Speaks podcast, I want people to have fun. I want this to be a lighthearted, fun, good time sort of a show. It's just an everyday life, everyday people, everyday story, comedy, entertainment. Let's just have fun type of a show. So when, D-Rek sent me his notes or a little story on himself, I checked out his website, which is DerekCanas.com, and front and center, it was the story that he sent me, and I read it, and right away it sets the tone for who he is, and the kind of approach that I wanted to take to it was that, he says in that little sort of introduction paragraph, his parents were now faced with the reality of having a battery-operated son, I suppose because of his cardiological or his heart defect, and then couple that with the fact that he basically got HIV in, I think he said it was, or from what I read, it was somewhere around like 1985, and then by the time it was discovered, which was 2001, it had progressed to full-blown AIDS. And I'm sure if Canas, DJ D-Rek, listens to this, he can correct me on the dates. But when I read that little blurb, I was kind of, at first I was slightly apprehensive because I thought, is this the direction I want to take the show? And I figured, and said to myself, I said, you know what? This guy has a compelling story. You can bring something to the table. People will love it. And you know what? He was one of my favorite guests. He is one of my favorite people that I have had the pleasure of ever talking to. And in fact, about, for 20 minutes after we had finished recording the actual interview, I talked to him for like that additional 20 minutes until, unfortunately, my Wi-Fi connection cut out and dropped on me, because I could have talked to him forever. Like, what we talked about in the interview, we just kept going for an additional, 20, 25 minutes. And I loved talking to him. I could have talked to him for hours had my Wi-Fi connection just held. He's that type of a guy. I loved talking to him. But getting back to why I was a little apprehensive at first was because I didn't know how people were going to react to, his story. And I didn't know whether people were going to love it or not, or like it at all. So, for a split second, I hesitated. But, almost right away, I reached out back to him and said, yes, send me a blurb. Come on, or send me, a bit of some notes on yourself and a bit of a story. so that way I have something to pull from. And he did. So he sent me the email, and it was fantastic. The interview went off so well. I mean, as I said earlier, I talked to him for an additional 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Just, we kept going from, thanks for the interview to, he did a bit of a plug for me, a drop, if you will, where it was, hi, this is DJ D-Rek, and you're listening to the Beats and Speaks podcast with Leigh Dickey, which was fantastic. So we talked for an additional 20 minutes, and he is such a warm, welcoming guy that I think I was more apprehensive about the interview because am I going to be able to do his story justice? It was more so, am I going to be able to do his story justice than how are people going to react? And to be truthful, I was more nervous on my end because I didn't want to ask him the same questions. I wanted him to have fun, as I want everybody who comes on this show to have a good time. And he did. He loved it. I loved the interview. People have received it really well. I have friends and colleagues that have reached out to me that are in the radio and television business that love the interview. And they think it's great. And I love that. I love the fact that my colleagues and my friends, they think that interview is fantastic. I sent it to D-Rek, Canas, DJ D-Rek, and he loved it. It came out fantastic. I loved having him on the show. I want to have him back. I want to have everybody that I've talked to so far, I want to have every single one of them back for another appearance because everybody has been so warm, welcoming, forthcoming with answers, which makes my job a whole lot easier. And, getting back to DJ D-Rek, Derek Canas there, when we booked, it came together so quickly. I think he reached out to me probably on the 16th or 17th. No, I think it might have been late on the 16th. I live in the Eastern time zone, so it was probably, by the time everything came together, it was late on the 16th. I gave him the dates that I was available to record, and then he got back to me right away, and I hadn't checked my email, fairly quickly. It was a few hours later, and then he had said, yeah, how's 10 a.m. tomorrow, which was like the 18th, which was the day that we recorded the episode, and it went up on the 27th, as I said in the beginning. So, we got it together. By the time I got back to him, it was already midnight on the 18th, which was the day that we were going to record. But we got it together. I got to bed. I set an alarm. I got up probably about between 7 and 8 o'clock to set everything up to make sure that my setup worked because I used the mic that I'm recording this little behind the scenes blurb on. This behind the scenes episode, I'm using an Apex 850 dynamic microphone with a Yorkville desktop mic stand and a Cable Creation XLR to 3.5 millimeter cable going into my smartphone, which is an LG Q6. So I use this exact setup minus the smartphone, or even the cable. I don't think the basic setup for that interview was the Apex 850 dynamic on the Yorkville desktop mic stand into an HP netbook that I have with an ART XLRT USB cable. As much as I wanted to use like a proper mixer and XLR sort of connection or signal chain in that regard, it was just, I didn't want to, bring my interface out here, have to set all that up, plug it all in. I was just like, let's keep it as simple as humanly possible. And the audio came out fantastic. The stories that he told from that crazy Vanilla Ice story, from that story about Vanilla Ice's biggest hit song, which is Ice Ice Baby. If you didn't know, chances are you probably already did. But from him going through a club, singing at the top of his lungs Vanilla Ice's biggest hit song, and then getting almost a permanent gig out of it. And then he was so forthcoming. We had talked about who would he put on his musical Mount Rushmore, because he's into music and he's a DJ. And we talked about Colt Ford, and just to give you a perspective, he is just this down to earth, honest, sort of, just the perfect Southern gentleman, if you will. And it was fantastic, And before I forget, I forgot to do this at the beginning, but you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast on your favorite podcast app. New episodes release every single Friday on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, and you can subscribe to us on YouTube by searching Leigh Dickey TV. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe there. Leave us a review. You can leave a review on my official Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Leigh T. Dickey. And leave us a review on your favorite podcast app, and I will feature it here on the podcast and on my official website. Thank you very much. But getting back to that, again, we talked about who he would put on his musical Mount Rushmore. Colt Ford, who's probably one of my favorite country artists. If you don't know who Colt Ford is, look him up as well. But, we talked about Vanilla Ice's biggest hit song, who he would put on his musical Mount Rushmore. And doing an opening for Colt Ford, and how he got into DJing, and, aside from the living with AIDS and the congenital heart defect, forget all that. He is just a fantastic guy. He is an amazing guy. I'd love to have him back. So, D-Rek, Canas, if you are listening, or Canas, sorry, I keep butchering the guy's last name, and he probably is screaming at his laptop while listening to this, or screaming through his phone while listening to this on his favorite app. But if you're listening, good sir, I would love to have you back. I loved having you on the first time. I'd love to have you back again. It was a fantastic interview, and had my Wi-Fi connection held, I probably could have talked to him forever. I mean, we spoke for an extra 20, 25 minutes before my Wi-Fi connection cut out. But it was fantastic, He is one of my favorite guests, one of my favorite people. I'd love to have him back. It was amazing. But, that's basically, from my perspective, a sort of a behind-the-scenes deal on how that whole thing came together. He reached out to me on Twitter, sent me a little bit about himself. I was, apprehensive at first, because I didn't know how it was going to be. I didn't know how it was going to be, not presented, but how the public how it was going to be reacted to, what the reaction would have been. And it was overtly positive. My colleagues in radio and television loved it. My friends loved it. They loved the interview. I loved the interview, because we went in an entirely different direction from what I think people were expecting. The guy, he has AIDS. He's got a congenital heart defect. He's had all these hardships. We could have gone that route. I chose not to. Because he even told me, he's like, asked me, what direction are we going to go in? I said, listen, if I ask you what your favorite movie is, and he's like, thank you. You know what I mean? And this was before we got into the actual interview. I said, I'm probably going to ask you what your favorite movie is. I'm not even sure if I did, but I'd have to go back and listen to it. And he said, thank you, because he answers the same questions over and over again. So granted, I may have slipped some questions in there that he's answered about 1,000,000 times, but the thing is, I wanted to have levity. I wanted to have fun. I wanted him to have fun. I want all my guests that come on this show to have fun. So if I ask you what your favorite movie is, or what your favorite ice cream flavor is, or, would you have a breakfast, or if you took, 3 things to a desert island, what would they be and why? Or like I said, and what actually made the episode was, who would you put on your musical Mount Rushmore? Because the guy's a DJ. That is a fantastic question. Not to toot my own horn, but it is. Okay? When you ask a musician, who would you put on your musical Mount Rushmore? Think about it. Who are your favorite musicians? I think he said Garth Brooks, Prince, and a few others. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but you get the point. I want these guys to have fun. I want everybody to have fun, and he loved the questions I asked. I loved having him on. It was fantastic. I'd have him on again in a heartbeat. So D-Rek, Canas, DJ D-Rek, if you're listening to this and ever want to make another appearance on the Beats and Speaks podcast, the door is always open, my inbox is always on, and there is always a spot for you here. But there you go. There's a little behind-the-scenes blurb on this latest episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast on how my interview with D-Rek Canas, a.k.a. DJ D-Rek, came together. Again, D-Rek, D-Rek Canas, thank you very much for reaching out, coming on the show, and telling your story. I loved having you on. And that's the thing about the Beats and Speaks podcast. Everybody's got a story. I want to hear it. I want to help you tell it. So if you want to be a guest on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, email me at LeighTDickey, that's LeighTDickey @gmail.com, and we will set something up, set up a day to record so you can tell your story, and we can just have a good old-fashioned, fun, good time. So if you want to be a guest on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, email me at LeighTDickey @gmail.com. New episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast are released every Friday at midnight Eastern Time on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on YouTube as well by searching for Leigh Dickey TV. Of course, all the links will be in the description below. And if you want to follow D-Rek Canas, a.k.a. DJ D-Rek, who is the subject of this episode, or at least the behind the scenes of this episode, you can go to DerekCanas.com. Of course, every link will be in the description below. You can find them all, and you can follow us all on social media. I will post my links below as well. But thank you all for listening. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Like I said, new episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast are released every single Friday at midnight Eastern Time on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us on YouTube by searching for Leigh Dickey TV. Of course, those links will be in the description. Leave us a review. Give us comments. If you want to be a future guest on an episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, email me at LeighTDickey @gmail.com and we will set something up. I want to hear your story. I want you to tell me and tell my audience your story because it's just going to be fun. We're going to have fun. That is the whole idea of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Fun, 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 till Daddy takes the T-Bird away. There's your Beach Boys reference. Okay, clearly I've had too much fun today. Thanks again for listening. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can leave reviews now on my official Facebook page, which is facebook.com/LeighTDickey. Everything will be in the description below. Follow. Comment, like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you all and talk to you all next Friday for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. I've been your host, Leigh Dickey, and I am out of here. I am signing off. It was a pleasure. We'll see you next Friday at midnight Eastern Time for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. All right, Leigh Dickey signing off. See you later. See you next Friday. Peace. LeighTDickey.com